Picture this: a small, seemingly insignificant island chain in the South Pacific, cloaked in dense jungle, surrounded by turquoise waters, and yet holding the fate of an entire region in its hands. Guadalcanal, part of the Solomon Islands, was more than just a dot on the map. It was a gateway to controlling the sea lanes and air power that stretched across the Pacific Ocean. For the Allied forces, it was a critical puzzle piece in a vast theatre of war, lying northeast of Australia, a strategic position that, if lost, could leave the entire region vulnerable to Japanese domination. The story of Guadalcanal is not just a tale of military maneuvers and battle strategies. It is the story of courage, determination, and the high stakes of global conflict. Imagine the tension among Allied commanders as they weighed the risks and rewards of launching an offensive in a region so far from home, where every decision could tip the balance of power. Japanese forces had already established a foothold, constructing an airfield capable of projecting power across the surrounding islands. This airfield was more than concrete and runway. It was a threat, a looming presence that could cripple Allied shipping, disrupt reinforcements, and extend the reach of Japanese aircraft over key territories. August 1942 marked a turning point. For the first time, American forces were about to move from a defensive posture to an offensive strike in the Pacific. Operation Watchtower would soon unfold, a daring attempt to seize Guadalcanal, stop the Japanese advance, and reclaim strategic control over the Solomon Islands. The stakes could not have been higher, and the men who would land on its beaches had no guarantee of victory. Yet, their mission was clear: take the island, secure the airfield, and change the course of the war in the Pacific forever. As you dive into this story, you will witness acts of bravery that defy imagination, encounters with nature that challenge every soldier, and the high-pressure decisions that would determine life and death. From the first moments of landing on Red Beach to the grueling battles in the jungle, Guadalcanal became a stage for heroism, sacrifice, and the testing of human endurance under extreme conditions. It is a story that reminds us that history is shaped not just by maps and strategies, but by the courage and resilience of individuals facing seemingly insurmountable odds. If you love learning about incredible moments in history, stories of strategy, courage, and turning points in global conflicts, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our deep dives into the battles that shaped the world. Today, we begin a journey into Guadalcanal, a small island with a monumental story where the tides of war, courage, and determination collided to change the course of history. The turning point in the Pacific theater came not through sheer numbers or overwhelming force, but through a single, decisive victory at Midway, where Allied forces managed to outmaneuver the seemingly invincible Japanese Navy. The triumph at Midway did more than sink aircraft carriers. It shifted the psychological balance of the war, proving to both the Allies and their enemies that Japan was not unstoppable. With this newfound momentum, the Allied commanders recognized that the time for passive defense had passed. The Pacific was vast, stretching across thousands of miles of ocean dotted with countless islands, each potentially a stepping stone for the enemy or a fortress for their own advance. Guadalcanal, with its dense jungles, rugged terrain, and critical airfield under construction, emerged as the first prize in this new strategy of offense. For the men of the use, Marines, the transition from defense to offense was not just a change in orders. It was a transformation of mindset. They were no longer waiting for the enemy to strike or for reinforcements to arrive. They had to take initiative, to storm beaches, push through unforgiving jungle, and confront an enemy that had already proven their willingness to fight to the last man. Planning the assault on Guadalcanal was a challenge in itself, a complex puzzle that required balancing limited resources, coordinating land and naval forces, and anticipating Japanese tactics that were as unpredictable as the Pacific weather. The operation was named Watchtower, but within the corridors of military command, it was also known as shoestring because of the scarcity of supplies, vehicles, and ammunition allocated to the mission. Despite these limitations, the Allies pressed forward, driven by the understanding that capturing Guadalcanal was essential not just for strategy, but for the morale of troops and nations alike. The landing on Guadalcanal was the first American offensive in the Pacific since the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it carried the weight of months of planning, anticipation, and anxiety. As the first waves of Marines approached Red Beach, dawn breaking over the horizon, they faced a landscape that seemed serene yet promised unimaginable challenges. Japanese defenders had begun constructing an airfield that, once completed, would allow them to control the skies and sea routes in the region, threatening supply lines and any Allied movement. The Marines knew that taking the airfield quickly was crucial, yet they could not anticipate the full scale of obstacles. From the thick jungle and treacherous swamps to the persistent threat of Japanese counterattacks that could strike with lethal precision at any moment. What followed was a sequence of events that tested every skill, every ounce of courage, and every instinct of the soldiers involved. The initial landing caught the Japanese construction crews and lightly armed troops by surprise, allowing the Marines to secure Henderson Airfield within a day. Yet the real battle had only just begun. The enemy, though unprepared initially, regrouped and counterattacked with a determination that revealed both tactical skill and the depth of their commitment to defending the territory. Colonel Ichiki's assault at Tenaru River, a frontal attack intended to overwhelm the Marines, ended disastrously for the Japanese, with nearly complete annihilation of the attacking force. This early engagement foreshadowed the brutal, attritional nature of the campaign that would characterize the fight for Guadalcanal over the coming months. As the weeks turned into months, the Marines on Guadalcanal learned that victory depended not just on firepower or courage, but on endurance, adaptability, and ingenuity. Japanese forces resorted to nighttime reinforcement runs, known as the Tokyo Express, bringing in troops and supplies under the cover of darkness, while the Marines had to improvise defenses, ration scarce resources, and navigate the relentless jungle terrain that threatened to sap strength and morale. Disease, hunger, and exhaustion became as formidable an enemy as the opposing soldiers, turning the campaign into a test of human resilience. Each patrol, each skirmish, and each strategic maneuver was a calculated risk, with commanders weighing the lives of their men against the larger objectives of the Pacific campaign. The shift from defense to offense at Guadalcanal also revealed the importance of coordination between land, sea, and air forces. Naval battles around the island were as intense and pivotal as the ground engagements, with both sides suffering significant losses in night battles and surprise attacks. Control of Henderson Airfield allowed the Allies to project air power, intercept reinforcements, and maintain pressure on Japanese positions. Air superiority became a decisive factor, proving that even a relatively small piece of land could hold immense strategic value if leveraged correctly. The Allies' ability to coordinate these efforts under challenging conditions demonstrated a growing mastery of operational planning and execution, laying the groundwork for subsequent campaigns across the Pacific. By December, fresh reinforcements under General Alexander Patch enabled the U.S. forces to transition fully into offensive operations, driving back Japanese troops and solidifying control over Guadalcanal. The victory, hard-won through months of relentless combat, heavy casualties, and extreme environmental challenges, marked a pivotal moment in the Pacific War. It demonstrated that a determined, well-coordinated offensive could overcome even the most tenacious defenses, and it shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded Japanese forces up to that point. The lessons learned on Guadalcanal would inform future operations, emphasizing the critical role of supply lines, the necessity of air and naval coordination, and the extraordinary resilience required of those who fought on the front lines. The morning of August 7, 1942, dawned over the South Pacific with a tension that could be felt even miles away on the approaching transport ships. For months, Allied forces had watched and waited, analyzing intelligence reports, debating strategies, and understanding the immense stakes that the capture of Guadalcanal represented. The Japanese had been steadily constructing an airfield on the island, Henderson Airfield, which, once completed, would give them the ability to project air power across the Solomon Islands and threaten the entire Allied position northeast of Australia. For the U.S. Marines, this was not just a target. It was a mission that could tip the balance of the Pacific War, a test of their courage, skill, and endurance under circumstances that few could fully imagine. As the first landing crafts cut through the early morning waters and approached Red Beach, the anticipation among the troops was a mixture of fear, determination, and a sense of purpose that bound them together. These Marines, many of whom had trained for months under harsh conditions, were about to step onto an island that was both a paradise and a battlefield, its dense jungle and rugged terrain hiding dangers that went beyond the armed enemy. Every step onto the shore carried the weight of history, the realization that their actions would not just determine the outcome of a single engagement, but influence the broader trajectory of the Pacific campaign. The men were aware that they were the first American offensive force to strike in the Pacific since Pearl Harbor, and the eyes of commanders, nations, and families back home were upon them, though no one could fully predict the challenges that lay ahead. The initial landing was met with a surprising calm. The Japanese forces stationed on the island were largely construction troops and lightly armed units, unprepared for the sudden ferocity of the assault. This allowed the Marines to advance toward Henderson Airfield with a combination of precision, caution, and relentless determination. The airfield, still under construction, represented more than concrete and earth. It symbolized a foothold of Japanese power that, if left unchallenged, could dominate the region. Securing it quickly became the primary objective of Operation Watchtower, the code name for the Guadalcanal offensive. The Marines' understanding of the airfield's strategic value fueled their relentless push, knowing that control over Henderson meant the ability to disrupt enemy supply lines, project air power, and establish a base for future operations in the Pacific. Yet, even with the initial element of surprise, the campaign was far from straightforward. The tropical environment imposed relentless challenges, with thick jungle foliage, swamps, and narrow paths that slowed movement and sapped strength. Heat, humidity, and disease became constant companions, transforming every maneuver into a battle not only against the enemy, but against the unforgiving landscape itself. The Japanese defenders, though initially caught off guard, quickly recognized the threat posed by the advancing Marines and began to organize counterattacks with a tenacity born of both training and desperation. Each engagement along the way tested the Marines' coordination, resolve, and adaptability, requiring them to balance aggression with caution in an environment where a single misstep could have catastrophic consequences. The capture of Henderson Airfield was swift, yet the significance of the moment extended far beyond the immediate tactical gain. By securing the airfield, the Marines established a critical base from which Allied aircraft could operate, providing air cover for supply lines, reconnaissance, and support for further operations across the Solomon Islands. The airfield became a thorn in the side of the Japanese, allowing the Allies to challenge Japanese naval and land forces in ways that were previously impossible. Every takeoff and landing at Henderson symbolized the broader struggle for control in the Pacific, turning the small island into a strategic linchpin whose possession would reverberate across the entire theater of war. However, the Marines knew that taking the airfield was only the beginning. Japanese forces, unwilling to concede such a critical position, launched repeated counterattacks, from small tactical assaults to larger coordinated strikes, each designed to reclaim the island and deny the Allies their new advantage. The Battle of Tenaru River, led by Colonel Ichiki, ended disastrously for the Japanese, demonstrating both the courage and resilience of the Marines and the brutal nature of jungle warfare. As the campaign unfolded, the struggle for Guadalcanal evolved into a prolonged contest of endurance, strategy, and logistics, where every day brought new challenges and the constant threat of enemy reinforcement or counterattack loomed over every decision made by the commanders on the ground. Throughout the campaign, the importance of coordination between land, naval, and air forces became increasingly clear. Naval engagements in the surrounding waters, from surprise night battles to attempts at reinforcements, directly impacted the Marines' ability to hold and expand their positions. Control of Henderson Airfield allowed the Allies to challenge these movements, providing the critical air superiority necessary to support ongoing ground operations. The island itself became a proving ground for the integration of joint operations, where lessons learned under fire informed the broader strategy of the Pacific War. By the end of the initial weeks, the Marines had transformed Guadalcanal from a remote, contested island into a strategic bastion of Allied power, holding Henderson Airfield against repeated attempts by Japanese forces to retake it. The victory was hard-won, a combination of meticulous planning, adaptability, and extraordinary courage under extreme conditions. Every patrol, skirmish, and logistical decision contributed to a larger story, one in which the Marines not only secured a critical objective, but also demonstrated the potential of offensive operations in the Pacific, turning the tide of a war that had previously seemed dominated by Japanese advances. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon on Guadalcanal, the Marines pressed forward, their boots sinking into the soft sand of Red Beach, each step bringing them closer to the heart of their mission. Henderson Airfield. The airfield, still under construction by Japanese forces, represented more than a stretch of cleared land. It was a strategic linchpin in the Solomon Islands, a place from which the Japanese could project air power across the Pacific, threaten Allied supply lines, and maintain a foothold that endangered the entire region northeast of Australia. For the Marines, capturing this airfield quickly was paramount not just for tactical advantage, but for the larger operational goal of asserting Allied dominance in the Pacific. The urgency infused every decision, every maneuver. As soldiers navigated treacherous terrain under the oppressive heat and humidity that would test the limits of endurance and willpower. The initial landing caught the Japanese defenders completely off guard. Many were construction workers and lightly armed personnel, unprepared for the sudden onslaught of trained combat forces. The Marines, moving with a combination of precision and relentless determination, seized the opportunity, storming through obstacles and securing the airfield with astonishing speed. Henderson Airfield, once in Japanese hands, was a tool of power projection. Now, in Allied control, it became a beacon of operational potential. The capture was not merely a victory of arms, but a psychological blow to the Japanese forces, shattering any assumptions of invincibility and signaling that the Allies were ready to shift from defensive postures to aggressive, calculated offensives. The moment the Marines established control, Henderson Airfield transformed from a construction project into a fully functional hub for Allied air operations. Aircraft began to arrive, bringing supplies, reinforcements, and the ability to launch reconnaissance missions across the region. The airfield's strategic location allowed the Allies to monitor Japanese movements, intercept reinforcements, and provide air cover for troops on the ground, effectively turning Guadalcanal into a fortified staging ground from which the Allies could project power far beyond the island itself. Every plane that took off from Henderson sent a clear message. Guadalcanal was no longer a contested outpost, but a center of Allied initiative in the Pacific campaign. However, the initial success did not mark the end of the struggle. The Japanese, determined to reclaim the airfield, quickly regrouped and launched a series of counterattacks, testing the resilience, coordination, and ingenuity of the Marines. The first major attempt, led by Colonel Ichiki at the Tenru River, ended disastrously for the Japanese, but it underscored the reality that Henderson Airfield, now a strategic jewel, would be the focal point of intense and sustained combat. The Marines faced a relentless combination of frontal assaults, guerrilla-style raids, and nighttime reinforcement runs known as the Tokyo Express, which kept both the island and the surrounding waters in a perpetual state of tension. Each engagement demanded tactical acumen and unwavering courage, as soldiers balanced aggression with caution, knowing that even small miscalculations could result in devastating losses. The geography of Guadalcanal itself posed as formidable a challenge as the enemy. Dense jungle, swamps, and narrow paths slowed movement and made supply lines vulnerable, while tropical disease and extreme weather tested physical limits and morale. The Marines learned quickly that victory depended not only on combat skill but on adaptability and resourcefulness. Every patrol through the jungle, every defensive position fortified, and every reconnaissance mission undertaken was a calculated effort to maintain control of Henderson Airfield, while preparing for the inevitable larger-scale Japanese counterattacks that would seek to retake the strategic hub. Control of Henderson Airfield also highlighted the critical importance of combined operations in modern warfare. Naval battles in the surrounding waters, often fought under cover of darkness, directly impacted the ability of the Marines to hold their positions. While air superiority provided by aircraft operating from the captured airfield became a decisive factor in repelling enemy reinforcements, each victory in the skies above or the seas around Guadalcanal reinforced the Marines' ground positions, creating a network of coordinated action that showcased the evolution of Allied operational strategy in the Pacific. The airfield's role extended beyond tactical advantage. It became a symbol of the shifting balance of power, demonstrating that control of even a relatively small island could alter the trajectory of the entire theater of war. As weeks turned into months, the significance of Henderson Airfield continued to grow. The initial capture allowed for the establishment of supply depots, medical facilities, and repair stations for aircraft, all of which sustained long-term operations and reinforced the Marines' ability to hold the island against persistent enemy attacks. The airfield became a lifeline, a place where strategic decisions met practical execution, and where the integration of air, land, and naval power could be fully realized. The Marines' ability to maintain and utilize Henderson Airfield under continuous threat from Japanese counteroffensives exemplified not only tactical brilliance but the extraordinary resilience and determination that characterized the Guadalcanal campaign. By securing Henderson Airfield, the Marines had effectively transformed Guadalcanal into a pivot point for Allied operations across the Pacific. The airfield allowed for control over key sea lanes, interdiction of enemy supply lines, and the projection of power into previously contested areas. Each day that the Allies held the airfield brought them closer to consolidating their position in the Solomon Islands and initiating subsequent campaigns that would eventually roll back Japanese advances across the Pacific. The capture and defense of Henderson Airfield marked a fundamental shift, proving that the Allies could take the initiative, sustain offensive operations, and achieve strategic objectives against a determined and experienced enemy. The story of Henderson Airfield is more than a military achievement. It is a testament to planning, courage, and endurance under extraordinary circumstances. From the surprise landing to the establishment of a crucial base for air operations, the Marines' actions on Guadalcanal showcased how determination, strategy, and resilience could turn a small, contested island into a decisive element in a global conflict. This campaign reminds us that in warfare, control of key terrain can redefine opportunities, alter the flow of battle, and demonstrate the profound impact of human courage and ingenuity in shaping history. Following the rapid capture of Henderson Airfield by the U.S. Marines, the Japanese command quickly realized that Guadalcanal had become a critical threat to their operations in the Solomon Islands and beyond, and they resolved to reclaim the island at any cost. What followed was a series of counterattacks that tested the resolve, discipline, and ingenuity of the Marines while illustrating the brutal realities of jungle warfare. The first significant response came under the command of Colonel Kiyono Ichiki, a Japanese officer tasked with leading a relatively small force in an aggressive attempt to surprise and overwhelm the Marines. Ichiki's contingent, numbering around 900 men, crossed rivers and dense jungle trails under the cover of darkness, intent on striking what they believed to be a lightly defended position, expecting the element of surprise to secure a swift victory. However, the reality on Guadalcanal was far different from Japanese assumptions. The Marines, though exhausted by days of intense combat and tropical conditions, had established well-prepared defensive positions around key points of the island, including the approaches to Henderson Airfield. As Ichiki's forces advanced, they encountered entrenched machine guns, coordinated rifle fire, and a resilient defensive network that turned their anticipated easy victory into a deadly trap. The Battle of the Tenaru River was swift and devastating for the Japanese. Despite their fervent commitment to honor and discipline, Ichiki's men were methodically cut down as they pressed forward, encountering resistance at every turn. By the end of the day, the assault had ended in complete failure. Nearly the entire force was annihilated, with only a handful of survivors managing to retreat, while Colonel Ichiki, adhering to the strict military codes of honor, committed ritual suicide in the aftermath of the defeat. The failure of Ichiki's assault was both a tactical and psychological turning point. It demonstrated to the Japanese command that the Marines were not only capable fighters, but also deeply entrenched defenders who could withstand concentrated assaults even under extreme environmental conditions. Yet, the Japanese did not immediately abandon their objective. Reinforcements and supplies continued to arrive via the perilous Tokyo Express, a series of high-speed naval runs designed to resupply and reinforce troops under the cover of darkness. Each new wave of Japanese soldiers, often understrength and fatigued from arduous voyages, was ordered into frontal assaults against the increasingly fortified American positions. These repeated attacks, launched across the inhospitable terrain of Guadalcanal, reflected a combination of desperation, rigid doctrine, and the expectation that sheer force of numbers could overcome entrenched opposition. The Marines, however, had adapted to the demands of the campaign with remarkable effectiveness. They leveraged the jungle, rivers, and ridges to channel Japanese advances into kill zones, utilized coordinated artillery and machine gun fire to maximum effect, and rotated units to maintain morale and combat effectiveness despite the constant strain of battle. Tropical diseases and logistical challenges. Each frontal assault by Japanese forces resulted in catastrophic casualties, further compounding the difficulty of sustaining their operations on the island. By mid-September, the Battle of Bloody Ridge became emblematic of the high human cost of these repeated attacks. with Japanese forces suffering hundreds of deaths in futile attempts to dislodge the Marines from strategically important terrain. The nature of the Japanese tactics revealed both their strengths and weaknesses, while the commitment to aggressive assaults and personal valor underscored the discipline and determination of their soldiers. The rigid adherence to frontal attacks against fortified positions demonstrated a failure to adapt to the realities of modern jungle warfare, where terrain, firepower, and logistics could decisively shape outcomes. Each successive attack depleted the experienced Japanese cadres, eroded morale, and highlighted the logistical difficulties of sustaining an offensive across vast distances and under constant threat from air and naval forces operating from Henderson Airfield. The Marines, by contrast, learned to integrate intelligence, reconnaissance, and coordinated support from air and naval assets into their defensive strategy, turning what might have been isolated skirmishes into decisive engagements that increasingly favored the Allies. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. For the Marines, every successful defense reinforced confidence in their training, leadership, and resilience, while simultaneously eroding the invincibility that Japanese forces had projected in earlier campaigns across the Pacific. For the Japanese troops, repeated defeats, mounting casualties, and the inability to breach American lines created frustration, desperation, and a recognition that Guadalcanal would not be easily reclaimed. The attritional nature of the campaign, marked by small-scale engagements, ambushes, and continual skirmishes, emphasized endurance and adaptability as much as raw combat prowess. And Henderson Airfield remained at the heart of this struggle, symbolizing both a strategic objective and a psychological anchor for Allied operations. As the weeks progressed, it became increasingly clear that the Japanese command had underestimated the Marines' ability to hold and fortify their positions under extreme pressure. Reinforcements arrived sporadically but often too late to change the outcome of engagements, and the repeated frontal assaults continued to exact a heavy toll. The cumulative effect of these failures was significant. Experienced Japanese soldiers, many with years of prior combat experience in China and elsewhere in the Pacific, were lost in large numbers, weakening the operational capability of the Imperial Japanese Army and undermining future attempts to regain initiative in the region. Each failed attack further entrenched the Marines' positions and demonstrated the importance of combining strategic foresight, environmental adaptation, and integrated force coordination in modern warfare. The Guadalcanal campaign, and particularly the series of Japanese counterattacks, illustrates the profound consequences of underestimating an entrenched enemy and relying on inflexible tactics. Colonel Ichiki's failed assault and the repeated frontal attacks that followed were costly, both in terms of lives and the broader strategic position of Japanese forces. Yet, these engagements also provide insight into the harsh realities of combat in the Pacific theater, where geography, climate, supply lines, and morale could prove just as decisive as numerical strength. The ability of the Marines to withstand relentless assaults, adapt to an unforgiving environment, and maintain control over Henderson Airfield set the stage for subsequent Allied operations and marked a turning point in the struggle for the Solomon Islands, demonstrating that strategic objectives could only be secured through resilience, innovation, and unyielding determination. The Japanese counterattacks at Guadalcanal, therefore, serve as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the brutal calculus of war. They reveal the costs of rigid doctrine and the perils of underestimating a motivated, well-prepared opponent, while simultaneously highlighting the extraordinary capacity of the Marines to endure and prevail under conditions that tested every aspect of their physical and mental endurance. ultimately shaping the outcome of the Pacific Campaign in ways that would reverberate throughout the remainder of the Second World War. As the battle for Guadalcanal raged into its third month, the Japanese command faced a sobering reality. The Marines had firmly entrenched themselves on the island, and recapturing Henderson Airfield was proving far more difficult than anticipated. Conventional supply routes and daytime naval movements were no longer feasible, as American aircraft from the captured airfield and naval patrols dominated the surrounding waters. To circumvent this, the Japanese devised an audacious plan to reinforce their troops under the cover of darkness, giving birth to what would become famously known as the Tokyo Express. These high-speed nighttime destroyer runs became the lifeline for Japanese forces on Guadalcanal, a desperate and dangerous method of supplying, rotating, and reinforcing soldiers across treacherous waters, all while evading detection and engagement by Allied naval and air forces. The Tokyo Express was a logistical marvel, demonstrating both ingenuity and necessity in the face of overwhelming challenges. Destroyers, nimble and relatively fast, would carry troops, weapons, ammunition, and provisions, threading through narrow channels and unpredictable currents, often under the threat of torpedoes, mines, and reconnaissance aircraft. The missions were meticulously timed and executed with precision, as any delay or miscalculation could lead to catastrophic losses. Yet, for all their planning and daring, these nocturnal runs were fraught with peril. The destroyers were lightly armored and vulnerable to even minor miscalculations in navigation, while the troops they carried faced grueling disembarkation under moonless nights and often hostile terrain, sometimes without the supplies they desperately needed to sustain themselves in a hostile jungle environment. The very necessity of the Tokyo Express highlighted the severity of the logistical challenges faced by the Japanese on Guadalcanal. Supply chains were stretched to their limits, and the need for speed and stealth often came at the expense of quantity and quality. Troops landed with minimal rations, limited ammunition, and insufficient medical supplies, forcing them to rely on ingenuity, foraging, and sheer endurance to survive. Many soldiers succumbed not only to combat but also to tropical diseases, malnutrition, and exhaustion, adding a human cost that rivaled the dangers posed by enemy fire. The Marines, aware of the Japanese reliance on these nighttime runs, strategically targeted landing points and engaged in reconnaissance patrols, making each mission a high-stakes gamble where success was uncertain, and failure could be fatal. The intensity of these nocturnal operations underscored the attritional nature of the Guadalcanal campaign. Unlike conventional battles, where front lines were clearly defined and objectives straightforward, the struggle on Guadalcanal was continuous, consuming men, material, and morale in a relentless cycle of attack, reinforcement, and defense. Each Tokyo Express mission, while critical to Japanese strategy, served as a stark reminder that the war in the Pacific was as much about endurance and logistics as it was about tactical brilliance or valor. Ships and soldiers alike faced relentless pressure, operating in an environment where daylight brought overwhelming vulnerability to air attacks, and night brought treacherous seas and unpredictable enemy action. The Marines, entrenched and well supplied from Henderson Airfield, were able to exploit these conditions, intercepting supplies where possible and using intelligence gathered from patrols and reconnaissance to anticipate Japanese movements. Night after night, destroyers braved the waters around Guadalcanal, delivering reinforcements who would be immediately thrown into the crucible of combat. These soldiers faced exhausted Marines, well-prepared defensive positions, and the psychological strain of operating in near-complete darkness, often landing with no knowledge of the precise locations of enemy positions. The landings were typically hurried, with troops disembarking directly into jungle terrain or along narrow beaches. making them vulnerable to ambushes and delaying their ability to organize effectively. The attritional cost of these operations was severe. Experienced Japanese soldiers were lost at alarming rates, and the repeated need for reinforcement drained the resources of the Imperial Japanese Navy, weakening their overall operational capability across the Solomon Islands campaign. The Tokyo Express also revealed the intricate interplay between land, sea, and air operations in modern warfare. While the Japanese relied on naval agility and night cover to sustain their forces, the Marines leveraged air superiority from Henderson Airfield to monitor shipping lanes, conduct reconnaissance, and launch attacks on vulnerable vessels. This interplay transformed Guadalcanal into a dynamic battlefield, where control of the skies and seas was as crucial as ground positions. Every successful interdiction of a Tokyo Express mission not only reduced the immediate combat capability of Japanese forces, but also underscored the vulnerability inherent in overextended supply lines and the challenges of sustaining prolonged operations in hostile territory. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. Japanese troops, constantly aware of the precariousness of their supply situation and the dangers of each approach to Guadalcanal, operated under immense stress, knowing that any setback could result in isolation or death. Conversely, the Marines, observing and occasionally disrupting these nighttime runs, gained confidence that their control of the island and airfield could be maintained despite the relentless attempts at reinforcement. This dynamic added a layer of psychological warfare to the campaign, where anticipation, deception, and morale became as decisive as physical firepower. In addition to the human cost, the Tokyo Express illustrated the broader strategic challenges faced by Japan in the Pacific. The reliance on high-risk, limited-capacity supply missions demonstrated the limitations of projecting power over vast ocean distances in the face of enemy control of key positions. The need to supply a relatively small force on a remote island required extraordinary effort, and each mission represented a delicate balance between operational necessity and exposure to catastrophic loss. This high-stakes environment emphasized the importance of adaptability, coordination, and innovation in sustaining combat operations, lessons that would resonate throughout the remainder of the Pacific campaign. Ultimately, the nightly runs of the Tokyo Express became emblematic of the relentless, attritional nature of the Guadalcanal campaign. Each mission was a test of courage, navigation, and endurance, highlighting the strategic importance of logistics, the challenges of sustaining operations in hostile environments, and the intensity of modern warfare, the Marines' ability to withstand repeated assaults, intercept reinforcements, and hold Henderson Airfield demonstrated the decisive value of preparation, adaptability, and integrated operational strategy. The struggle over supply and reinforcement underscored that the Pacific theater was as much a battle of logistics and attrition as it was of direct confrontation, shaping the outcome of Guadalcanal and setting the stage for the Allied momentum that would continue to build across the Solomon Islands and beyond. In this context, the Tokyo Express was not merely a series of supply runs but a crucible that revealed the limits of Japanese operational reach, the resilience of the Marines, and the strategic significance of Guadalcanal. It epitomized the intensity, complexity, and human cost of warfare in the Pacific, demonstrating that victory often depended on the ability to endure, adapt, and exploit every advantage in a theater defined by its relentless demands and unforgiving environment. By late November 1942, after months of grueling combat, relentless Japanese counterattacks, and the perilous nights of the Tokyo Express, the situation on Guadalcanal had reached a critical juncture. The 1st Marine Division, though heroic and resilient, had been severely depleted by disease, exhaustion, and continuous fighting, and the strain of maintaining positions against determined Japanese forces was evident. In this desperate context, the arrival of fresh troops became not only a tactical necessity, but also a strategic turning point for the Allies. General Alexander Patch, recently appointed to command the newly formed Civ Corps, arrived with reinforcements that included 3 fresh Marine divisions, bringing much-needed manpower, supplies, and morale to the embattled island. Patch's approach to the campaign reflected a combination of careful planning, strategic foresight, and a clear understanding of both the strengths and limitations of his forces. Unlike previous operations that had been constrained by limited intelligence and hastily assembled resources, Patch had the advantage of observing the cumulative lessons learned from the initial landings and the brutal counterattacks that had followed. He recognized that success would depend not merely on holding existing positions, but on taking the initiative, systematically engaging the Japanese forces, and leveraging the superiority of combined arms including artillery, air support, and naval firepower. The reinforcement of Guadalcanal with fresh troops transformed the dynamics of the campaign, shifting the psychological and operational balance in favor of the Allies. With the arrival of new divisions, the Marines could finally take the fight to the Japanese rather than simply reacting to their assaults. Operations were meticulously coordinated to maximize the impact of every unit, ensuring that advances were supported by artillery and that flanks were protected against potential counterattacks. Jungle paths and ridgelines that had previously been dominated by Japanese defensive positions were now systematically cleared, and the Allies began to reclaim territory that had been contested for months. The infusion of reinforcements not only augmented the numerical strength of the forces on the ground but also revitalized morale among the original Marines, who had endured extreme fatigue, malnutrition, and the constant psychological strain of jungle warfare. The offensive actions launched under Patch's command were both deliberate and adaptable, reflecting an understanding that success on Guadalcanal required more than brute force. Troops moved in coordinated advances, employing reconnaissance to avoid ambushes and using terrain to channel Japanese forces into defensible positions. Small unit tactics, patrols, and intelligence gathering became critical components of the strategy, allowing the Allies to apply pressure selectively while minimizing unnecessary exposure. The psychological impact on the Japanese was significant. Facing a reinvigorated and well-coordinated enemy, Japanese troops already weakened by previous losses, disease, and supply shortages found themselves increasingly unable to maintain offensive operations or hold their positions. The securing of Henderson Airfield remained central to the Allied campaign, as control of this vital installation allowed continuous air support for advancing ground forces and naval units operating in the surrounding waters. The Japanese, despite repeated efforts to disrupt operations through the Tokyo Express and localized assaults, were increasingly constrained, unable to effectively resupply or reinforce their units in sufficient numbers. Every failed counterattack further drained their capacity and eroded morale, while the Allies, buoyed by fresh troops, supplies, and strategic planning, began to solidify their hold over Guadalcanal, turning the tide of the campaign. As December turned into early January, the combined efforts of Patch reinforcements and the resilient original Marine forces culminated in a series of decisive engagements. Japanese troops, already exhausted and demoralized by the attritional nature of the campaign, were gradually pushed back, their positions overrun by coordinated assaults that leveraged both superior numbers and strategic planning. The jungle, once a theater where Japanese forces had sought to exploit their knowledge and agility, became a landscape where disciplined and reinforced American units could dictate the pace of combat, effectively turning every engagement into a test of endurance and tactical acumen. The impact of these reinforcements extended beyond the immediate tactical outcomes. By securing Guadalcanal, The Allies established a critical foothold in the Solomon Islands, enabling control over key sea lanes and denying the Japanese the ability to project air power over northeastern Australia and adjacent regions. Henderson Airfield, now firmly in Allied hands, became the cornerstone of subsequent operations, facilitating air strikes, reconnaissance missions, and logistical support that would underpin further campaigns across the Pacific. The victory at Guadalcanal demonstrated the strategic importance of reinforcements, coordination, and integrated operations, illustrating that even in the most challenging environments, well-executed planning and sustained effort could overcome entrenched opposition and harsh conditions. The human element of these operations cannot be understated. For the Marines, the arrival of fresh divisions under Patch not only provided relief from continuous combat, but also renewed a sense of purpose and possibility. Soldiers who had endured months of grueling conditions now had the support necessary to press the offensive, apply accumulated experience, and engage the enemy with renewed confidence. This reinforcement allowed for rotations, resupply, and recovery, sustaining combat effectiveness and reducing the attritional pressure that had characterized the early stages of the campaign. By the time Guadalcanal was secured in early 1943, the cost had been immense, yet the strategic implications were equally profound. Approximately 1,600 American lives had been lost, while Japanese casualties, including combat deaths and losses from disease and malnutrition, reached staggering numbers, significantly weakening their operational capabilities in the Solomon Islands and beyond. The successful integration of fresh troops under General Patch demonstrated the critical importance of timing, planning, and the capacity to adapt strategy to evolving conditions, highlighting how reinforcements could decisively shift the momentum of a campaign when deployed effectively. The Guadalcanal campaign, culminating with the arrival and impact of Patch's fresh divisions, exemplifies the intersection of strategy, endurance, and logistics in modern warfare. It underscores the necessity of reinforcing exhausted troops, coordinating combined arms operations, and exploiting both terrain and intelligence to achieve sustained success. By securing the island, the Allies not only denied the Japanese a vital strategic position, but also set a precedent for future operations across the Pacific, where the integration of reinforcements, careful planning, and adaptability would continue to shape the course of the war. The story of Guadalcanal, therefore, is one of resilience, strategic foresight, and the transformative impact of fresh forces on the battlefield, illustrating how the combination of planning, manpower, and determination can achieve decisive outcomes in the most challenging theaters of war. The battle for Guadalcanal was one of the most brutal and consequential engagements of the Pacific War, a campaign that left an indelible mark on both American and Japanese forces and reshaped the trajectory of World War II. From the initial landings in August 1942 to the eventual Allied victory in early 1943, the campaign exacted a staggering human cost, reflecting not only the intensity of combat, but also the unforgiving conditions of the island itself. Approximately 1,600 American lives were lost in the course of this fierce struggle, while Japanese casualties, including combat deaths, disease, and malnutrition, reached an estimated 32,000, underscoring the devastating impact of attritional warfare in a tropical environment, where the climate and terrain were as lethal as the enemy. Guadalcanal, a relatively small island in the Solomon chain, became a crucible of modern warfare, where the interplay of air, sea, and land operations tested the endurance, strategy, and adaptability of all forces involved. The island's dense jungles, sweltering humidity, and treacherous rivers created conditions that magnified the challenges of combat. Soldiers and Marines alike faced relentless heat, tropical storms, and disease outbreaks. With malaria, dysentery, and fungal infections compounding the dangers of bullets and artillery shells, the Japanese troops, already weakened by months of continuous supply shortages and exhausting nocturnal reinforcement runs known as the Tokyo Express, were particularly vulnerable, with attrition from non-combat factors significantly reducing their fighting capacity. The American Marines, though better supplied following the arrival of reinforcements under General Patch, were not immune to the island's harsh realities. They endured months of jungle warfare, carrying heavy equipment through dense vegetation, building defensive positions, and repelling repeated Japanese assaults under extreme physical and psychological strain. The combat itself was unrelenting, characterized by close-quarters encounters, ambushes along ridgelines, and protracted firefights around strategic positions such as Henderson Airfield, which had become the linchpin of Allied operations. Each engagement took a toll on manpower and morale, demonstrating that even well-trained and well-equipped forces could not escape the human cost of sustained tropical combat. Disease, in particular, played an outsized role in shaping the Guadalcanal campaign. For both American and Japanese troops, malaria and other tropical illnesses incapacitated thousands, often striking down soldiers faster than enemy fire. Medical infrastructure was limited, and the combination of inadequate treatment, harsh climate, and exhaustion meant that many who fell ill never recovered. For the Japanese, already struggling with disrupted supply lines and insufficient reinforcements, disease compounded the attritional losses inflicted by combat, leaving units depleted and often unable to mount coordinated counterattacks. The Americans, while better able to mitigate these effects through rotating reinforcements and establishing field hospitals, still experienced significant operational strain, highlighting the extent to which environmental factors could influence the course of a campaign. Beyond the human toll, the Guadalcanal campaign illustrated the intricate dynamics of modern warfare, where control of key terrain, logistical mastery, and adaptability were as decisive as courage and firepower. Henderson Airfield, captured early in the campaign, served as a base for continuous air operations, providing reconnaissance, close air support, and interdiction of Japanese supply lines. The presence of Allied aircraft allowed for more effective defense against Japanese naval forces attempting to reinforce the island, while also giving the Marines the ability to launch offensive operations with greater coordination. The interplay between air superiority, naval interdiction, and ground combat created a theater in which every engagement carried strategic significance, and losses on either side had ripple effects across the broader campaign. The staggering Japanese casualty figures reflect the combination of tactical misjudgments, logistical failures, and the harsh realities of jungle warfare. Repeated frontal assaults, such as those led by General Kawaguchi during the Battle of Bloody Ridge, often resulted in catastrophic losses, exacerbated by inadequate resupply and exhaustion. Troops arriving via the Tokyo Express faced the dual challenge of navigating treacherous landing points and immediately engaging entrenched Marines, frequently without sufficient ammunition or provisions. These attritional battles decimated veteran units, stripping the Japanese military of some of its most experienced and capable soldiers and forcing a shift in strategy from offensive operations to a primarily defensive posture across the Solomon Islands. The battle's toll extended beyond the statistics of death and injury. Psychological strain, fatigue, and the ever-present threat of disease created conditions that tested the endurance and cohesion of both armies. The Marines, while achieving a strategic victory, emerged from the campaign physically and emotionally battered, acutely aware of the thin margin between life and death in the unforgiving environment of Guadalcanal. The Japanese, facing mounting losses and diminished operational capacity, confronted the sobering realization that even meticulous planning and daring nighttime operations could not overcome the combined weight of Allied firepower. Air superiority and logistical challenges. Guadalcanal's outcome also had broader strategic consequences, serving as a turning point in the Pacific theater. The attritional toll inflicted upon the Japanese weakened their capacity to mount large-scale offensives in the region, while the success of reinforced American operations demonstrated the value of combined arms. Coordinated logistics and sustained offensive pressure. The ability of fresh divisions under General Patch to capitalize on earlier gains, integrate seamlessly with existing forces, and methodically push back the Japanese underscored the importance of reinforcement and operational planning in achieving decisive outcomes. Ultimately, the staggering human cost of Guadalcanal stands as a testament to the extreme challenges of Pacific warfare, where victory was inseparable from endurance, adaptability, and resilience. The approximately 1,600 American deaths and 32,000 Japanese casualties reflect not only the ferocity of combat but also the profound impact of disease, harsh tropical conditions, and logistical strain. Guadalcanal exemplifies the complexity of warfare in the Pacific, demonstrating that success required more than courage. It demanded strategy, coordination, and the ability to sustain forces in a hostile and unforgiving environment. The lessons of the campaign resonate far beyond its immediate tactical and operational outcomes, providing enduring insight into the human cost of war, the importance of preparation, and the strategic significance of resilience, adaptability, and determination in overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges. Guadalcanal, therefore, is remembered not merely as a battle of attrition and heavy loss, but as a pivotal moment where the interplay of human endurance, strategic planning, and environmental adversity converged to shape the course of history, marking the beginning of the Allied momentum that would eventually carry through the Pacific and contribute to the ultimate defeat of Japan. The Guadalcanal campaign, often remembered for its grueling combat and staggering human cost, also served as a profound lesson in the evolving nature of modern warfare, highlighting the critical importance of air superiority, secure supply lines, and the seamless coordination of land and sea forces, while simultaneously foreshadowing the desperate measures Japan would later employ in the form of kamikaze tactics. The battle, fought across dense jungles, treacherous beaches, and unforgiving tropical terrain, was more than a contest of brute force. It was a complex interplay of strategy, logistics, and adaptability that revealed the decisive role of integrated military operations in determining the outcome of conflicts in the Pacific theater. From the very beginning, air power emerged as a central determinant of success. Henderson Airfield, captured almost immediately by U.S. Marines following the initial August 7, 1942 landings, became the fulcrum around which the battle revolved. This single airstrip transformed Guadalcanal into a strategic hub, allowing Allied aircraft to conduct reconnaissance missions, provide close air support to ground troops, and interdict Japanese naval movements attempting to reinforce their beleaguered garrison. The ability to dominate the skies not only offered immediate tactical advantages but also exerted strategic pressure on Japanese forces, disrupting supply lines and creating conditions that forced repeated frontal assaults, often with catastrophic results. The Japanese, deprived of secure air cover, struggled to protect their troops and convoys, highlighting how control of the air had become an indispensable component of modern military operations. Supply lines, or the lack thereof, played an equally decisive role in shaping the course of the campaign. Both sides grappled with the logistical complexities of sustaining combat operations on a remote island in the South Pacific. For the Japanese, the challenge was particularly acute, following repeated naval defeats and the attritional impact of continuous engagements. They relied heavily on nighttime destroyer runs, famously known as the Tokyo Express, to deliver troops, ammunition, and provisions to Guadalcanal. These high-speed nocturnal missions were fraught with danger, exposing Japanese ships to the risk of ambush, air attack, and navigational hazards, while the limited volume of supplies meant that reinforcements often arrived exhausted and ill-equipped to mount sustained operations. In contrast, the U.S. forces, though initially constrained by insufficient resources and a hastily assembled invasion force, gradually established more reliable supply chains, allowing them to rotate fresh divisions, provide medical care, and sustain both offensive and defensive operations over several months. The contrast in logistical effectiveness underscored a simple truth. Control of supply lines could determine not only the immediate outcome of battles, but also the long-term viability of forces engaged in protracted campaigns. Guadalcanal also exemplified the necessity of coordinated land-sea operations. Success in the Pacific was no longer determined solely by ground combat prowess or naval dominance. It required the integration of both elements to create a synchronized strategy capable of overcoming complex challenges. The initial landings demonstrated the potential of such coordination, with naval task forces providing fire support, protecting troop transports, and delivering the first wave of Marines to critical points along the coastline. Once ashore, the Marines leveraged artillery, engineering units, and tactical air support to secure key objectives, such as Henderson Airfield, while naval forces continued to interdict Japanese reinforcements. Conversely, Japanese attempts to replicate this coordination often faltered, hampered by insufficient communication, the attritional depletion of experienced personnel, and the inability to sustain their operations over extended periods. The Guadalcanal campaign thereby illustrated that mastery of integrated operations, combining the unique strengths of land, sea, and air forces, could decisively shift the balance of power even in environments as hostile and logistically challenging as the Solomon Islands. The campaign also foreshadowed one of the most infamous tactics of the later Pacific War: kamikaze attacks. Facing mounting losses, logistical constraints, and the erosion of experienced naval air power, Japanese forces began to resort to increasingly desperate measures, including suicide missions designed to inflict maximum damage on Allied ships. While the first embryonic forms of these tactics appeared during Guadalcanal as pilots flew missions with near certainty of death in the face of overwhelming opposition, they would later evolve into a central component of Japanese naval strategy in the Philippines, Okinawa, and other theaters. Guadalcanal thus served not only as a battleground for conventional warfare, but also as a laboratory in which the limitations of conventional strategies were tested, and the seeds of extreme measures born out of strategic necessity and cultural ethos were sown. Beyond these operational lessons, Guadalcanal reinforced the human dimension of warfare, demonstrating how endurance, adaptability, and morale could shape the outcome of engagements even when material resources were constrained. Soldiers and Marines contended with relentless tropical storms, oppressive heat, treacherous rivers, and a disease-ridden environment, requiring ingenuity and resilience to maintain operational effectiveness. The Japanese, despite their early occupation of the island and tactical knowledge of the terrain, were gradually worn down by the relentless pressure of coordinated Allied operations. Logistical deprivation and sustained attritional losses, highlighting the intersection of environmental, strategic, and human factors in determining the result of a campaign. Ultimately, Guadalcanal stands as a testament to the evolution of warfare in the Pacific, illustrating that air superiority, secure and sustainable supply lines, and the seamless integration of land and naval operations could decisively shape strategic outcomes, while simultaneously revealing the lengths to which a nation might go when pressed to the limits of endurance and capability. The battle's legacy extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory, setting the stage for further Allied offensives, undermining Japanese strategic initiative, and shaping the doctrine and operational planning that would carry Allied forces through the remainder of the Pacific War. In this sense, Guadalcanal was more than an island. It was a crucible in which the future of the Pacific campaign was forged. It demonstrated that the ability to sustain forces, maintain supply lines, integrate complex operations, and dominate the air could turn a seemingly marginal position into a decisive strategic advantage. It also provided a sobering glimpse into the lengths an opponent might go when faced with inevitable defeat, offering lessons that would resonate through subsequent battles and informing military thinking for decades to come. The campaign's enduring significance lies in its clarity. Success in modern warfare is a multidimensional pursuit, requiring not only courage and determination but also meticulous planning, adaptability, and mastery of the complex interplay between land, sea, and air in an unforgiving environment, lessons exemplified in the fierce and costly struggle for Guadalcanal. As the smoke cleared over the dense jungles and rocky coastlines of Guadalcanal, the significance of what had just transpired began to crystallize, both for those who had fought on the ground and for the wider strategic picture of the Pacific War. The campaign, lasting from the first landing in August 1942 to the final Japanese withdrawal in early 1943, was not simply a battle for an airfield or a small island chain. It was a battle that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the war. The Allies had achieved something that, for months, seemed almost impossible. They had not only held their ground but had struck a decisive blow against an enemy long considered invincible. The Japanese military, whose earlier victories across Southeast Asia and the Pacific had inspired awe and fear, had been confronted with the harsh reality that their dominance could be challenged and, in this case, broken. Guadalcanal's victory carried both symbolic and practical weight. Symbolically, it shattered the myth of Japanese invincibility that had haunted Allied planning and morale since the fall of the Philippines. The early strikes on Malaya and the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, soldiers and sailors alike could now see tangible proof that the Japanese military machine, though disciplined, experienced, and highly motivated, could be overcome through courage, strategic planning, and the effective integration of land, sea, and air. The psychological impact was enormous. It bolstered Allied confidence across the Pacific, instilling a renewed belief that victory was achievable even against a formidable foe. Practically, Guadalcanal represented a critical turning point in the operational theater of the Pacific. By capturing and holding Henderson Airfield, the Allies secured a vital foothold from which to project air power across the Solomon Islands and threaten Japanese shipping lanes. The disruption of Japanese supply lines and the attritional losses sustained by their forces created conditions in which subsequent campaigns, such as those in New Guinea, the Central Solomons, and eventually the Philippines, could be executed with far greater strategic advantage. The ability to maintain air superiority and coordinate complex operations across multiple domains became a blueprint for Allied offensives throughout the Pacific, demonstrating that well-planned, coordinated assaults could overcome even entrenched and determined resistance. The human cost of Guadalcanal, while staggering, underscored the gravity of the victory. Approximately 1,600 American servicemen gave their lives in the campaign, enduring not only enemy fire but disease, tropical conditions, and the relentless stress of jungle warfare, Japanese casualties were even more severe, with estimates of up to 32,000 troops lost to combat, disease, and starvation. These figures, while sobering, also serve to highlight the extraordinary resilience, ingenuity, and tenacity demonstrated by both sides. The Allies, in particular, proved their capacity to sustain operations under extreme hardship, to adapt to an unforgiving environment, and to integrate combined arms effectively. Lessons that would carry forward into every subsequent engagement in the Pacific. Moreover, Guadalcanal set in motion a shift in the strategic initiative. For the first time, the Allies transitioned fully from a defensive posture, reacting to Japanese advances, to a proactive approach aimed at seizing the momentum and dictating the terms of engagements. This transition was critical not only to the success of the Pacific campaigns but also to the broader Allied war effort. By forcing Japan onto the defensive, draining its experienced personnel, and undermining its operational capabilities, Guadalcanal laid the foundation for a series of advances that would eventually push Japanese forces back toward their home islands. The campaign demonstrated the profound impact that a single, strategically chosen operation could have on the larger course of the war, particularly when executed with clarity of purpose, adaptability, and coordination across multiple branches of the military. Equally important, Guadalcanal foreshadowed the evolving nature of warfare in the Pacific, the intensity of attritional combat, the significance of controlling airfields, and the logistical challenges inherent in sustaining forces across remote islands highlighted lessons that would be repeated in campaigns from Tarawa to Iwo Jima. It also offered early indications of the desperate measures Japan would later employ, including the kamikaze tactics that would come to define the final stages of the conflict. These lessons, though learned at a terrible human cost, contributed to the Allies' growing strategic sophistication and their ability to anticipate, counter, and ultimately overcome Japanese initiatives. As we reflect on the Guadalcanal campaign, it is clear that its importance extends far beyond the immediate tactical victories and losses. It was a crucible in which the capabilities of Allied forces were tested and proven, a demonstration of how determination, planning, and coordination could achieve what once seemed impossible. The courage of those who fought, the sacrifices made under extreme conditions, and the strategic foresight that guided operations all converged to make Guadalcanal a defining moment in the Pacific War, a story of resilience, adaptation, and ultimate triumph that continues to inspire military historians and enthusiasts alike. Thank you so much for watching and joining us on this journey through one of the most pivotal battles of World War II. If you enjoyed this story and want to continue exploring the incredible history of the Pacific War and other historic battles, please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any future episodes. Your support helps us bring more detailed and engaging content directly to you. From all of us here, thank you again for being part of this historical journey. And as the day winds down, we hope you have a peaceful and restful night. Sweet dreams. And may the stories of courage and resilience from history inspire you in your own life. Good night.